So Massive has decided to finally implement some sort of armor shred mechanic into PvP with the 1.5 patch that is currently live on the public test server. But there's still quite some confusion on how it works. So for today I wanted to take a look at two things. First up, how does armor damage in PvP work? And second up, how much extra DPS are you getting with extra armor damage versus other players? Let's go! I'm assuming that most of you that play a lot of PvP in the Division probably know about the inherent PvP damage modifier for every weapon in the game. Basically, before any buff or any debuff is applied to any weapon in PvP, the base damage of that weapon is reduced to only 48% of the original damage if you use it versus other players. This has been done because players obviously have a lot less health than most of the NPCs walking around, and without a modifier like this in place, the time to kill would be way too low in the Dark Zone and players would die from a few bullets without being able to properly react. I'm not saying that that doesn't already happen in some cases, I'm just saying that without this damage modifier, it would be a lot more severe. Now, because this damage modifier is set to 48% of the original damage, that means that a weapon that would hit for 10,000 damage per bullet will now only hit for 4,800 damage per bullet. That is, of course, if the other player does not have any other source of damage mitigation. But as we also all know, that's pretty much never the case. You will never meet a player in the Dark Zone that doesn't have at least some sort of damage mitigation. Think about armor, for instance. The sweet spot in patch 1.4 is to sit around 60% damage mitigation in World Tier 4. You can get that much damage mitigation by rolling armor on all your gear pieces and all your gear mods. But if the player has 60% damage mitigation, that would mean that the 4,800 damage that the bullet would do would be even further reduced down to 1,920 damage. And that is what currently happens. That is the way that PvP damage works right now. However, in patch 1.5, players can finally spec into extra armor damage to punish people a bit more who like to get their toughness mostly from stacking armor instead of stamina. It works a little bit different than in PvE, however. Obviously, in PvE, if you have 15% extra armor damage, you will simply do a flat 15% more damage to targets as long as you're damaging their armor. But in PvP, players do not have a dedicated armor bar. Instead, they have a certain damage mitigation percentage that they get from armor on their gear. So how does armor damage work in PvP then, if it doesn't add a flat damage percentage to it? Well, that's what we're gonna get to right now, because the way that Massive implemented it is that armor damage now makes it so that your weapon ignores a part of the damage mitigation that other players have from their armor. So for example, we have player 1 here with 15% extra armor damage and he shoots at player 2. Player 2 has 60% damage mitigation. So the way that these two are gonna interact is that 15% of that 60% mitigation that will simply be ignored, meaning that player 1 is doing damage as if player 2 only had 51% mitigation in total. Now this sounds very powerful, it sounds too powerful, right? And yeah, Massive thought the same, so to avoid this enemy armor damage from becoming too powerful, they added a conversion rate to make armor damage in PvP a little less powerful. The conversion rate that they used is 0.3, that means that players will have their total armor damage multiplied by 0.3 times before it applies to any PvP scenarios. So for this example, player 1 had 15% armor damage, we multiplied that by 0.3, which will leave us with only 4.5% armor damage for PvP. So when player 1 shoots at player 2, who still has 60% damage mitigation, the weapon will act as if player 2 only had 57.3% armor. It doesn't ignore an insane amount, such as without a conversion rate. You will still see an effect, although it will not be as big as it was before. Now, on paper, this may look like it almost has no effect, but with armor damage being a native roll on assault rifles, and it being an option to roll on the gear now as a major attribute in quite a lot of places actually, it's quite easy to get something like 40% armor damage on your character if you also have something like Destructive as a talent. Which turns that 60% damage mitigation that other players might have into only 52.8. That is still a huge difference in damage per bullet, as previously we said that your damage per bullet was only sitting at 1920, well, with the extra armor damage it goes up to 2267. That is an 18% increase in DPS, something not to laugh about. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind that this scenario is when extra armor damage is the most effective. We're testing it versus a player with 60% damage mitigation. That is a lot, and if you were to put this to the test versus someone with only 45% damage mitigation, you will see that the results are already a lot lower, with your bullets doing 2640 damage without any added armor damage, but then only 2899 damage with 40% extra armor damage on your character. That's only a 10% increase as compared to the 18% increase we got from a character with 60% damage mitigation. So as you can see how effective this damage stat will be, that is going to completely depend on how much damage mitigation your target has from armor. If you want to calculate it for yourself on your specific weapon or your specific setup, then I have the formula for you right here. All you have to do is insert the damage per bullet of your weapon right here, enter the armor damage on your character right here, and then place the damage mitigation amount of the player you're shooting at in this last area. The result should give you the per bullet damage that you're dealing to him, and you can change any of these values to see how much of an increase or a decrease you will get in damage. And that, guys, that is how armor damage works in patch 1.5 in PvP. I'm personally not too big of a fan of the way that they implemented it, mainly because it is quite hard for people that aren't as invested into the game as myself to really see how much extra damage this is going to give them. I do think that an armor penetration feature in PvP is a good thing to have in the game. I think it is healthy. It gives sort of a counter to stacking armor, but some more clarity on this stat and some more clarity on a lot of other things as well, such as what damage types are additive and multiplicative, that would be really nice. For example, I know that for some reason the headshot damage bonuses from the gear mods and the talents, that's all additive, but then the headshot damage bonuses from Hunter's Fate and Sentry, they are both multiplicative, which makes a 3 Sentry, 3 Hunter's Fate setup a lot more powerful than it seems. And unless you do the math yourself on every single one of these items, on every single one of these statistics, you aren't going to know about this, and you're not gonna know what is good and what is bad. I really think that for these reasons, it would be so nice to have more in-game information about pretty much everything. But hey, I guess that if the developers want to keep it like this and they want to keep it vague, you're gonna be forced to watch more of my videos. I mean, I don't mind. YouTube money! Anyways, that was it for today. Big thanks to these three guys for helping me out with some of the math and some of the testing. Definitely saved me some time there. And to you guys, I hope you enjoyed and I hope it was helpful. And as always, I will see you all later. Or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.